I still remember the first time I stepped into these cities. The streets were silent, broken, and strangely alive, as if every abandoned building and empty alley had a story to tell. Walking past shattered windows and rusted gates, I felt chills run down my spine, imagining the lives that once thrived here, and the darkness that took over. Each corner whispered secrets, each shadow seemed to move on its own. This isn't just about haunted legends. It's about real places, real struggles, and the echoes of lives left behind. Are you ready to walk with me through these haunted, unsafe streets? If you love exploring haunted and abandoned places with me, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the adventure. 1-inch Detroit, Michigan, USA. I still remember the first time I walked through the streets of Detroit. The air felt heavy, almost like the city itself was holding its breath. Buildings, once towering symbols of pride and progress, now stood hollow, their windows like empty eyes staring back at me. I could hear the distant sound of a broken street sign banging against a rusty pole, carried by the cold wind that swept through the abandoned neighborhoods. Every step I took echoed on the cracked sidewalks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I wandered deeper, I stumbled upon an old, boarded-up house. The paint was peeling, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. For a moment, I just stood there, imagining the life that had once thrived inside these walls. Detroit had been a city of dreams, the heart of the American automotive industry. But after decades of economic decline and population loss, it felt more like a ghost of its former self. I couldn't help but wonder what stories these abandoned houses held. Families who had to leave suddenly, businesses that shut down forever, and the dreams that had faded away. I decided to step closer to one of the old factories near the river. The sheer size of it made my chest tighten. Inside, the smell of rust and decay was overwhelming, and the sound of my own footsteps seemed to awaken the building, as if it remembered the workers who had once filled it with life. I found broken tools scattered on the floor and old papers fluttering in the drafts. I imagined the hands that had held them, the voices that had filled the halls with laughter, complaints, and arguments. Now, it was silent, except for the occasional drip of water from the leaky roof. What struck me the most wasn't just the abandonment, it was the contrast of life outside the city. Cars passed by on the main roads, people rushing to work, unaware of the quiet despair hidden in the side streets. I felt a strange mix of sadness and awe. Walking through these places made me confront a reality I rarely thought about, how quickly life can change, how a city can rise and fall, and how human stories are left behind like footprints in the dust. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the empty streets, I sat on the curb and tried to absorb it all. I thought about the people who still called parts of Detroit home, struggling to rebuild, to keep hope alive amid ruins. And I realized that even in its decay, Detroit held a strange kind of beauty, a testament to resilience, to history, and to the stories that linger long after the lights go out. I left the city that evening feeling humbled, almost as if Detroit had whispered its secrets to me, secrets of life, loss, and the echoes of a city that refuses to be forgotten. 2-inch New Orleans, Louisiana, USA. I arrived in New Orleans on a humid afternoon, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and old brick. Walking through the French Quarter, I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me. Every corner seemed to whisper secrets from decades past, stories of people who had lived, loved, and sometimes suffered in these narrow, cobblestone streets. The city was alive with music and laughter, but beneath it, I could sense an undercurrent of something darker, a presence that wasn't easily seen but somehow felt. I decided to explore the older neighborhoods, where the houses leaned on each other like weary friends and the paint had long since peeled away. The streets were quieter here, broken shutters flapping in the wind, the occasional door creaking as if reminding me that I was not alone. I passed a cemetery with wrought iron gates and faded names carved into the stones. The stories of voodoo, of spirits lingering between worlds, weren't just tales told to tourists, they were alive in the way the locals spoke, the way they looked at the old graveyards with reverence and fear. I could almost hear the murmurs of people long gone, echoing through the arches of the tombs. As I turned down a narrow alley, I noticed a mansion that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. Locals called it the Lalaurie House. Its windows were dark, and the walls bore stains that hinted at horrors once hidden inside. Standing there, I felt a chill run down my spine. I imagined the lives that had been trapped within these walls, the screams that must have echoed late at night, and the fear that residents must have carried every day. Walking away, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching, keeping an eternal watch over the city's secrets. The further I went, the more I realized that New Orleans thrived on contrasts. Jazz music floated from a nearby street, children laughed playing in the sun, yet the shadows of the past clung to the buildings and alleyways. The city's history of natural disasters, crime, and unrest had left scars that were visible to anyone willing to see. I could feel the stories of families displaced, of neighborhoods abandoned, and of lives interrupted, all blending with the legends of hauntings and spirits. As night fell, the gas lamps flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the streets. I stopped by the river, listening to the water lap gently against the banks. The city felt alive, yet haunted, not by ghosts alone, but by memory, by the weight of history, and by the collective sorrow and resilience of those who had called this place home. Leaving New Orleans that night, I carried with me a sense of awe and unease, knowing that some stories are too real to ever fully forget, and that the city itself keeps them alive, whispering to anyone willing to listen. 3-inch St. Louis, Missouri, USA. The first time I stepped into St. Louis, I felt like I had entered a city of contrasts. The gateway arch loomed in the distance, a shining symbol of pride, yet as I walked deeper into the neighborhoods, the reality of the city hit me. Streets were lined with abandoned buildings, some with windows smashed and graffiti sprawled across their walls. It was quiet, too quiet, and every step I took on the cracked sidewalks echoed like a warning. I couldn't help but wonder what had caused so many people to leave, and why these streets felt haunted even without a single soul around. I wandered toward an old factory district, its brick buildings dark and hollow. Inside, the smell of mold and rust filled the air. Broken machines lay scattered on the floor, a testament to a time when the city was bustling with work and life. I imagined the workers who had once been here, the sounds of their voices, the clatter of machinery, and the small joys of daily life now replaced by silence. Walking through those halls, I could almost feel the presence of the past lingering, like invisible shadows watching my every move. Later, I found myself near the Lemp Mansion, a place locals whispered about with caution. Its exterior was grand, yet there was a sense of tragedy that hung over it. I could feel it in the way the wind moaned through the broken windows, in the eerie stillness of the garden, and in the stories the residents told about the Lemp family. People claimed that their spirits never left, trapped by the pain and sorrow of the past. I couldn't see anything with my eyes, but my chest tightened, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to catch a fleeting shadow or hear a faint whisper. I could feel it in the way the wind moaned through the broken windows, in the eerie stillness of the garden, and in the stories the residents told about the Lemp family. People claimed that their spirits never left, trapped by the pain and sorrow of the past. I couldn't see anything with my eyes, but my chest tightened, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to catch a fleeting shadow or hear a faint whisper. As the sun began to set, the city took on a different character. The orange glow cast long shadows across the streets, making even the familiar places seem mysterious. I walked past abandoned schools and churches, imagining the children who had once laughed and played here, and the families that had left behind their homes in search of better lives. The contrast between St. Louis' lively downtown and these forgotten corners was almost heartbreaking. It made me realize how much history is carried in silence, how much life can leave behind echoes that never fade. By the time I left the city, I felt like I had seen two Street Louises at once, one alive with energy and movement, the other lingering in the memories of its past, filled with sorrow, abandonment, and the faintest whispers of the people who had called it home. Walking away, I understood that St. Louis wasn't just haunted by stories or rumors. It was haunted by history itself, by the dreams that never came true, and by the lives that had been quietly left behind. 4-inch Baltimore, Maryland, USA. I still remember the first time I set foot in Baltimore. The city felt alive in a way that was hard to describe, but also heavy, almost like it carried the weight of countless stories that had unfolded on its streets. As I walked past the old row houses, many of them abandoned or boarded up, I could feel the history pressing in on me. Windows, broken or dusty, seemed like eyes watching my every move. The air smelled faintly of the harbor and old brick, mingling with the distant hum of traffic. Every step I took made me more aware that this was a city that had seen both hope and despair in equal measure. I wandered into one of the older neighborhoods, streets twisting and turning as if designed to confuse outsiders. Here, the buildings leaned on each other like tired friends, their facades cracked and weathered by decades of harsh winters and human neglect. I passed by an abandoned school with swings that creaked in the wind. It was eerie to think about the children who had once played here, their laughter now replaced by silence. I couldn't help but imagine the stories of families that had struggled to survive, or even thrive, in this city full of both opportunity and hardship. Later, I found myself near the old hospitals and forgotten alleys of downtown. The shadows were growing long, and the cold air seemed to creep into my bones. I could feel the history of the place in every brick and every faded sign. Stories of patients left behind, of doctors and nurses who once worked tirelessly, haunted these empty halls more than any ghost ever could. Walking there, I felt a strange mix of fear and awe. It was as if the city itself was whispering its secrets to me, stories of lives lived, lost, and sometimes forgotten entirely. As night approached, Baltimore changed again. Street lamps flickered along the empty avenues, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed almost alive. I thought about the people who still called this city home, the ones who had endured crime, poverty, and abandonment, yet somehow found a way to keep going. The contrast between the vibrant neighborhoods I had seen earlier and these quiet, deserted streets made me realize how much history can linger in silence, in spaces left behind by time and circumstance. By the time I left Baltimore, I felt like I had seen both sides of the city, one full of life, movement, and noise, and another filled with the echoes of the past, where every abandoned house and empty alley told a story of struggle, loss, and resilience. Walking away, I understood that the real haunting wasn't supernatural, it was the weight of history, the presence of lives once lived, and the silent reminders of the city's darkest days, still lingering quietly in the corners of Baltimore. 5-inch Gary, Indiana, USA. The first time I arrived in Gary, I felt an unsettling silence as soon as I stepped off the car. Unlike other cities I had visited, this one seemed almost frozen in time. Streets that should have been bustling with life were empty, lined with abandoned houses and shuttered businesses. The air smelled faintly of steel and rust, a reminder that this city had once been alive with the clanging and humming of factories. Every step I took made the cracked sidewalks groan beneath me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the city was watching me, holding its breath as if remembering the people who had once called it home. I walked past neighborhoods where children's laughter had long disappeared, and homes sat empty, their windows staring blankly like hollow eyes. Graffiti-covered walls that once told stories of community pride. I imagined the families who had left in search of work, the promises of better life that never came, and the dreams that had crumbled along with the factories. Gary had been a place of opportunity, a booming steel town that shaped America's industry, but now, it was a ghost of its former self. The weight of loss pressed down on me, making me acutely aware that I was walking through a city carrying decades of pain, decay, and memory. As I turned into an old street that led to what was once a school, I noticed the swings moving gently in the wind. The playground was silent, but I could almost hear the faint echoes of children running and shouting, the distant laughter mingling with the hum of broken streetlights. I thought about the teachers and neighbors who had tried to hold on, keeping some sense of life alive in this decaying place, and my chest tightened with both sadness and respect. This wasn't just abandonment, it was a city that had been betrayed by time, industry, and circumstance. Later, I found myself near one of the remaining steel mills, the skeletal structure looming against the gray sky. Inside, the machinery lay silent, coated in dust and rust. I imagined the workers who had spent their lives here, the sweat and toil, the pride of building something greater than themselves. Now, it was empty, a monument to both human effort and failure. Walking through the broken corridors, I felt a strange mix of awe and melancholy, as if the walls themselves remembered the lives they had once held, whispering stories that only someone paying attention could hear. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the empty streets, I paused on the curb and tried to take it all in. Gary felt alive in memory, haunted not by ghosts, but by the weight of its history. I realized that the true haunting of this city was its silence, the reminders of families and lives that had been uprooted, and the relentless echo of a once powerful town now struggling to survive. Leaving Gary that evening, I carried with me the feeling of a city frozen between past glory and present decay, a place where history is written not just in books, but in the very streets and buildings that refuse to be forgotten.